Pour yourself a cold one.
Let's drink them, huh?
And listen to Ross Tucker break down the top college prospects on another tasty edition of The College Draft.
Yeah, it's Daddy Soda time here on the College Draft Podcast, presented, of course, by DraftKings. I'm Ross Tucker, former NFL offensive lineman, 5 teams, 7 years, classic journeyman. Now we've got 5 podcasts as part of our network, and I probably have at least 5 media gigs. I like the symmetry there. Westwood One, CBS, Odyssey, the Eagles. Sure, I could find another one if I needed to make it 5. You already know about the Ross Tucker Football Podcast, which is daily during the season, even money every week, placing our bets, fantasy feast, setting our lineups. Andrew Brandt bringing it home with the business of sports. And this podcast, one of my faves, because it's 3 podcasts in one. It's called The College Draft, and it's because I know that Emory Hunt is a star who's going to be a household name very, very shortly. Follow him on social media like I do at FBall Game Plan on Twitter. He's already got a huge following on YouTube, and rightfully so, Football Game Plan on YouTube. We are, by the way, youtube.com/Ross Tucker NFL. We're not at Emory, at Emory's level, but we're getting there. We're working on it. So check out our YouTube page. You can watch this show or see the highlight clips of any of our shows there, or on social media at Ross Tucker Pod. It really is time to order the draft guide if you haven't yet. I love every year. Several of you email me, tweet me. I got the draft guide. I got Emory's draft guide. It's awesome. You got to do it. Footballgameplan.com/2023 draft guide. If you really want to know something about every prospect, the only draft guide you can get is Emory's. That's it. The other ones just don't go that deep. They don't have that many people. They don't know the lower level guys that end up playing in the playoffs as undrafted free agents. Like, what's that guy's name? Kahu for the Dolphins from Texas A&M Commerce. Emory was all over that guy. Other people aren't. Emory, as is usually the case in January, is not home. Where are you, Emory?
I am in Orlando, Florida again. Last week I was here for the Hula Bowl. I came back yesterday. We're kicking off the Tropical Bowl today and this week. Now, this year is something unique with the Tropical Bowl. Today and tomorrow is the Tropical Bowl scrimmage. So these are guys that probably were call-ups from the FCS Bowl, and also some other guys that didn't just quite make the Tropical Bowl practice roster. So they get some opportunities to get work in front of scouts and personnel decision makers, and maybe get a call up for the regular week, which takes place Thursday, Friday, and the game is on Saturday. But this is a good game. This is a good mix of predominantly FBS prospects from the Group of 5 and Power 5 levels, in addition to guys from the lower levels, so the FCS, D2, NAIA, and some guys from the U Sports up in Canada. So it's a great week of work. I've actually called this game before as a color analyst. This is where one of my interviews back on YouTube, you can see I interviewed Devlin Hodges here at this All-Star game. There are a lot of guys that have gone and gotten drafted from the Tropical Bowl. Stanley Roberts, Thompson Roberts, I believe is his name. That was a cornerback for FIU that ended up getting drafted by the Jags, I believe. There's a ton of guys. Claiborne from the Jags, the returner, was here. And we saw a guy this past weekend 2 weekends ago for the Chiefs was in this game too. So you're going to see a lot of guys on Sunday coming from the Tropical Bowl, which is why I always love to attend.
What's the difference, if any, Emory, between the Hula Bowl and the Tropical Bowl?
They're about one and the same, to be completely honest. Is that now that the Hula Bowl is mainland, it kind of runs concurrently to what the Hula Bowl, what the Tropical Bowl does. Because before, when it was in Hawaii, guys had choices. Do you want to go to Hawaii? Yeah, because of the trip and to say the Hula Bowl, but how many scouts are going to be all the way out there when a lot of the scouts have chosen to be more southeastern based in terms of their all-star game travels? Because they used to run like, okay, you had the Tropical Bowl, then you had the Shrine Game in St. Pete, then the Senior Bowl. And, you know, it was the NFLPA game and the Hula Bowl out in Hawaii. There were the outliers because they're so far out west. Yeah, you're going to get scouts there, but a ton of scouts were here at the Tropical Bowl because of where it was located and the time it was going to happen. So them and the Hula Bowl essentially have a lot of the same players, and that's what makes this such a critical event on the scouting calendar.
Interesting. So it hasn't really started yet. So I can't ask you who has shined. Are there guys ahead of time that you're especially interested in checking out?
Yeah, keep an eye on quarterback Fred Payton out of Mercer. You know, he is someone that was super efficient all throughout his time at Mercer. He transferred in from, I want to say, South Alabama. I have to double check that, but I know he transferred in from an FBS program. But he played really well for Mercer. It was so close to getting these guys their playoff berth this year. It just kind of fell apart. The team did at the end. You know, I thought they got snubbed. But he's really good. He had a really good week at the FCS Bowl in December, which landed him on this roster. Connor Degenhart, we talked about him before, I believe, from New Haven, transferred
Yeah.
from Holy Cross. He's someone that has found his way here. He was excellent at the FCS Bowl. He was at the College Gridiron Showcase, performed well, and now he's here at the Tropical Bowl. So again, these guys are making their way, getting more tape, getting more opportunities. And for someone like Degenhart, it's a, hey, I played Division II ball, high level Division II ball in the NE10 that has some great talent. New Haven is one of the better teams in the NE10. And now you get to showcase, okay, I can play against FBS guys, and that's going to be the biggest key. You know, even if you go watch Fred Payton's game against Alabama, there are some throws in that game. You're like, wow, he's really peppering these targets across the board against his Bama defense. So I like seeing these guys make this effort here, and there's a ton of guys on both rosters from the Tropical Scrimmage, which starts today and tomorrow, and then the regular bowl week Thursday and Friday. It's going to be fun to watch because there's a lot of prospects. About, I'd say, a good 150, 200 prospects here that you'll get to see over the 4 days.
So speaking of quarterbacks, we did get some news since last week's show as it relates to CJ Stroud and Spencer Rattler, the quarterbacks at Ohio State and South Carolina. You know what's interesting, Emory? I didn't even realize that CJ Stroud hadn't turned pro till yesterday. And I was skiing Saturday up at Holiday Valley in Western New York, and there were some kids from Columbus there, and they were like, he's coming back, man. We're just offering him so much money that he's going to stay for one more year. They really thought, I mean, that was the talk in Columbus and Ohio State, that they might have been able to rack up enough NIL money to be able to get him to stay for another year. That didn't happen, but I still think it's interesting and noteworthy that I kind of feel like if a top 5 guy can consider it, that we're kind of at that point now where certain guys are going to stay in school because of the NIL money that otherwise would have gone pro.
And here's the thing, Ross. If it was large enough, he would have stayed, which tells you a lot about this NIL money. A lot of it is probably like crypto, funny money, right? Where is it as much as they say it is, or is there stipulations, or can I get it as soon as I sign? You know what I'm saying? There's a lot of questions that I don't have the answers to that I would love to find the answers to, because if they threw, let's just say for the sake of easy numbers, $10 million at CJ Stroud for one more year, do you take the $10 million or do you go pro, top 5? Because again, if you're a top 5 talent and you're playing at Ohio State, you got a lot of guys coming back. You're going to be a top 5 talent at that position next year. So yeah, take $10 million and come back and then go and earn more money. So it makes you wonder how much real money is at stake and whether or not he just decided, you know what, I all of this sounds, extremely fickle, extremely funny. I'm gonna just go pro and get the for sure money, as opposed to, this NIL money and then go pro the next year.
We talked about this maybe a couple weeks ago after the college football playoff semifinal. I thought you made such an interesting point. I would encourage people to go back and listen or watch the episode about Stroud not showing his mobility that much at Ohio State. And, it's a deeper conversation about, are these guys at times trying to show that they are pocket quarterbacks because they don't want to get their reputation as being a runner or a dual threat guy. They want people to look at them as pocket quarterbacks, even though they can move around, because he showed he can. I had never seen him even move. You watch an Ohio State game, he just catches the ball in shotgun. He's got all kinds of time. He throws the ball to an open receiver. He makes a great throw. I didn't even know he could move. Literally, there were times when I watched Ohio State, I thought he was a statue. But then he showed against Georgia he can move. Do you have a comp for him, Emory, or do you have a preference between CJ Stroud and Bryce Young?
That's a great question, Ross. And the comp I have for him is an interesting one, because I just feel like his accuracy and the way he delivers the football is right on par with this guy I'm about to say. But he reminds me so much of Troy Aikman and how he throws the football. I just like the fact that Stroud can drop back, quickly decipher, and get that ball out perfectly at the right spot. So, athleticism be damned. Now, again, Troy was someone that could move within the pocket prior to the knee injuries and stuff like that. Remember, he was the guy that was at Oklahoma, then transferred to UCLA, but early in his Cowboys career, he still had great pocket mobility, which is still a valuable asset. So I compared him to Troy Aikman. I still feel like that's a really good comp. And for me, in terms of the preference, it's about, okay, which type of offense I can win with both guys. So that's like number one question you ask yourself. Can I win with this guy, or will I have to coach around him and win in spite of him? Both guys I can win with. Now, I can win in different ways with both guys. My sprint out game is going to be prevalent with Bryce Young. My my zone read is going to be prevalent with Bryce Young. Not saying he's a runner that can threaten you, but he has the explosiveness to where he can get around the corner. You have to honor that. Now, my waggle game, which is a little bit different than sprint out, is going to be in play with CJ Stroud. My play action passing game going to be prevalent with CJ Stroud. My classic drop back passing, my shotgun passing game is going to be really good with both. So both guys give you the strength that you can win with, but you can win in different ways. I know if I have a dynamic tailback, I'm going to go with Bryce Young because of his athleticism, which is, I think, superior than Stroud, is going to give that tailback much more advantageous boxes to run against as opposed to Stroud. Stroud is good, but teams don't really respect his ability to run. He has mobility, but he's not someone that's going to threaten you. So he kind of runs like Dwayne Haskins run. Athletically, he's probably like Dwayne Haskins that we saw in Pittsburgh when he dropped some weight. He showed a little bit more athleticism, getting in and out of the pocket, and those things, and the willingness to run. So I think that's my answer for both guys. It all depends on which type of offense you want to run, because you can win with both.
Before we get to Rattler, I do want people to know, especially those of you in Ohio and Maryland, with the divisional round games coming up, usually my favorite weekend in football, you can download the DraftKings Sportsbook app, use code Ross, and new customers can bet $5 on the NFL playoffs divisional round and get $200 in free bets instantly. It's only at DraftKings Sportsbook with code Ross. Minimum age and eligibility restrictions apply. See show notes for details, but code Ross over at DraftKings to get $200 in free bets this weekend. What about Spencer Rattler, Emory? I know you were one of the first people to talk about this, that with how he played against Clemson and down the stretch and Tennessee, that he might actually decide to turn pro. He's coming back to South Carolina. I kind of think it's the right decision. It's pretty small sample size of him playing that well. If he comes back and plays that well for a whole year, he could be like one of the guys we're talking about next year.
Right. His situation reminded me a lot of, and I felt the same way. It reminded me a lot of Cardell Jones's situation at Ohio State. Like, hey man, listen, you had one of the more impressive runs in a short sample size that you could ever have. Big games mattering in the regular season. The last game you needed to win to get into the conference championship game, you won that one. You had to win the conference championship game. You had to win this playoff game against Bama, and you had to beat Oregon in the national championship. You went on an impressive run. Make the league make the decision. Don't go back to school, because now you have a full season to have them pick apart your game. How are you going to top the last 4 games you just competed in? You won't. And for Rattler, it's like, hey man, your name was already high prior to 2021, and then it kind of went down. And then earlier this year, you were struggling a little bit. Now you're catching fire. Now you're on point. You had a really good game against Notre Dame. You didn't win, but you made some amazing throws. You were competitive. You scored a lot of points. You might want to leave while your iron is hot in a draft class that you could, at least in my opinion, he's a better player and prospect than Will Levis. So now teams that, let's say like the New York Giants, that may be looking for a quarterback of the future that's picking late, depends on what they really think of Daniel Jones, and how much they're going to try to pay him. But if you're going to get it, because right now the Giants are in the back end of the draft, so they're not in franchise quarterback territory. They'll have to trade up if they love a guy. But if you throw yourself into this draft class that right now everyone's talking about, Bryce Young, Stroud, Anthony Richardson, Will Levis, you become that fifth guy. You become that wild card guy. So you become the guy that you can have because you're going to kill pro day. You're going to kill the combine with the throws. You're going to kill those private workouts. You have a chance to really be a first round pick, regardless of what the draft advisory committee says. And so now you come back and like, man, okay, do we go back into the pool next year and hope to increase? You have some guys coming back, but also some guys left. South Carolina transferred out, to go elsewhere. So the team may be different. You want to work with the offensive coordinator that works well with pro quarterbacks, so you have a reason to go back. But I'm always like, listen, man, your value when everyone's talking positively about you is probably at its highest right now. So leave and go and play pro ball. And even if it doesn't work out for you in terms of getting drafted high, look at a guy like Sam Howell, who now will go into the offseason and into next year as Washington's starting quarterback. But maybe Washington would have thought differently if you came out in this class. Maybe the Texans may see you and say, you know what, man, maybe we can use our 2 first-round picks on position players, trade back into the first, and take Rattler with our 3rd first. You entering the draft puts a lot on the table. And so next year, now you're competing with Caleb Williams. You're competing with Drake May. You're competing with Shedeur Sanders. You're competing with all of these other quarterbacks. You really have to not only do what you did the last 4 games, but you have to do that for 15 games, 12, and if you go into the playoffs. So I understand why he went back, but like I was saying when Cardell Jones was coming out, I probably would have jumped to the NFL while everyone was singing praises about my name.
Yeah, no, I remember saying I thought Cardell Jones should go pro. Speaking of quarterbacks, Emory, I can't remember the last time I heard this much buzz about a CFL quarterback. It's Nathan Rourke, who played for the Ohio Bobcats in college. His brother is the starting quarterback for the Ohio Bobcats in college. He just signed with the Jags, where I think he believes that's his best chance, to stick in the league as a number 2 or a number 3, which makes sense because Doug Peterson has that history from going back to Green Bay and in Philly of developing quarterbacks, keeping them around. Right now, they got CJ Beathard as the backup. Rourke probably thinks he can beat him out, and they don't have a quarterback on their practice squad. So they like to have 3 quarterbacks, at least one guy on the practice squad. I don't know. Was he signed to the practice? No, he signed a futures contract. He wasn't signed to the practice squad. Oh, because they got EJ Perry on the practice squad from Brown. So that's who Rourke will be battling with next year is EJ Perry. I don't know, Emory. I know you always follow these other leagues. Did he just tear it up there or what? Because I can't remember the last time I heard this much about a CFL quarterback.
Yeah, because usually it was Bo Levi Mitchell of the Calgary Stampeders that were flirting to, hey, he had to work out with the Vikings. He was thinking about jumping down in south to go compete in the NFL because he was tearing it up in the CFL. Rourke had a phenomenal year, Ross. He was the rebirth of the BC Lions. They were so good offensively this season until he got hurt. Then he lost a lot of games. Then he got back for the playoffs. They won one and then lost the next week. But man, when you think about, he won most outstanding player, which is their MVP award, and they name it properly up there, by the way. It's not most valuable player, it's most outstanding. So therefore, it really is open to all positions. Because if we say most valuable, obviously down here is going to always be the quarterback. But Rourke was phenomenal up there for the BC Lions. And it was something that he really didn't show at Ohio. I mean, the fact that, he was challenging tight coverage, making these throws down the field. Yeah, he was getting the benefit of some luck. And when they ran up against a really good defense, i.e. Winnipeg, he threw some interceptions, right? Because there was a stretch during the season where he hadn't thrown a pick and he had like 20-something touchdowns and with no picks. So he was playing ridiculous ball. He gets hurt. They go on a losing streak. He gets back for the playoffs. And then they go on and so forth. But yeah, this was a real good signing for him because, again, it's a financial signing. If he can get number 2 or get backup money or even get on the practice squad in the NFL, you're going to get more than what you were going to make as a starter in the CFL. Where I don't like it is the fact that you're conceding to go and be a backup when you probably had the leverage to ask for more as a starter in the CFL because of what you did this past season, the awards you won, the statistics you put up, and how well that team looked with you under center. So you're getting to play because you're not going to play in Jacksonville. And you also have to compete with EJ Perry, who also, I believe, could be a stellar CFL quarterback because he plays that spread game. He's athletic. He does a lot of what they do up there rather well, a lot of things he does. So the oddball out here is to me, our man out is probably Beathard because you have an intriguing prospect in Perry that you can develop and groom, athletic. You bring in another guy, Rourke, that has starting professional experience. Beathard to me is the odd man out, but maybe that's just my mindset. I'd rather play than be a backup. But as I say that, it's also hard for me to say, you know what, man, I'm gonna turn down $750,000 to go make $150,000, $200,000 as a starter. The math just doesn't math in that situation, Ross. So you got to do what's best for you and your family.
Without question. In terms of lessons from Wild Card Weekend, I know you and I did this last year, and it was really popular. Some of the scouting lessons we took. We'll do it next week with the takeaways from the divisional round. We'll do it after the conference championship game and after the Super Bowl. Scouting lessons we can learn from watching the weekend that was in football. I guess I have 2, Emory. One is patience. It's a really hard thing to have, really hard thing to do because the NFL, the owners a lot of times don't have patience with the GMs or the coaches. So the GMs and coaches can't really have patience with the players. But Daniel Jones, man, Daniel Jones played awesome. And, people wanted them to get rid of him the last couple of years. He's going to end up getting a lot of money now. First quarterback over 300 yards and throw for 300, run for 70. He was awesome. So I think that both my lessons revolve around Daniel Jones, Emory, and they're kind of interrelated. Patience and coaching. If you're an owner or you are in the front office, you got to take a long, hard look at who's coaching these players before you give up on them. Because they could have easily given up on Daniel Jones earlier. They get Dabo in there, they get Kafka in there, and all of a sudden Daniel Jones is a top 15 quarterback in the NFL and looks like he could be their starter for the next 10 years. Whereas he didn't look like that at all his first 3 years. So I guess my 2 lessons scouting lessons go together, and it's patience and coaching.
And Ross, I gotta push back a little bit on that. You're right about him playing really well last week against Minnesota. He outplayed Kirk Cousins because he has the element that Kirk Cousins doesn't have, the athleticism. Those 70 something yards rushing were the difference in the game. Because if Daniel Jones was a true statue, Minnesota probably wins that game because a lot of the pressures probably get home, but they couldn't. And that also helps Saquon be Saquon even better because now you have to really account for Daniel Jones's athleticism. But we can't ignore that he had 15 touchdown passes in the regular season, you know? And so a lot of the part that you're talking about that was excellent, the coaching part was, man, are we coaching around him, you know, or are we, or is he good? I think for Daniel Jones, the good thing for him is that now he has to change. He changed the conversation because he played himself out of getting replaced immediately because they won't have a high enough draft pick. And now he puts the onus on the Giants. The Giants could say, okay, was this an anomaly or was this a sign of things to come? But if you're Daniel Jones, you say, yeah, was it an anomaly or is it a sign of things to come? You got to find that out because I know based off the last couple of games, and granted, Minnesota twice and Indianapolis were his best games. Based off these last games and based off what we just did in the playoffs, I broke a record in the playoffs. You got to make that decision, Giants, and how much that decision is worth to you. So he puts all the onus now on the Giants. So I agree with you there in that regard. But the 15 touchdowns is something I just can't ignore. But my two scouting lessons also tied to the Giants, and it ties to patience and understanding the roster and how good NFL players are. Case in point, all season long, you heard, and people in the media and fans have short memory. So all season long, you heard, oh, Daniel Jones is out there throwing to, bus drivers or UPS workers. Wait a minute. Let's go back to all of the spring and summer training camp reports. Who was one of the best receivers out there? It was the guy he's making plays for right now in Richie James. All we talked about was how great Richie James was in the spring and how great he was in the summer. We also talked about, and this is where people have to understand the roster. Like, the Giants are not in as bad of a shape receiver-wise as people like to make it out to be. Isaiah Hodgins, if you go back to my 2020 draft guide, was a phenomenal prospect coming out of Oregon State. They got him basically for free. That's a good receiver. Lawrence Cager, same draft class, was one of my favorite converts. The flex tight end types, the big wide receivers, the F receivers that's going to transition essentially into a tight end. They have him on the roster and he's made plays. He scored touchdowns for them this season. He's there. You also look at Colin Johnson, who was balling all throughout the spring and the summer, was going to be the starter over Kenny Galladay, but in that joint practice against the Jets, he tore an Achilles and he was out for the season. So now you have another 6'5", 230-pound receiver coming back to go along with Isaiah Hodgins, to go along with your slot receiver, Richie James. You pick 24th. You can improve your offensive line. You can even add another receiver, like a Jackson Smith and Jigba or someone like that. So if people pay attention to the roster and have the patience that there's a lot of answers on the roster already for these guys. Hell, the Giants even have on the practice squad James Washington. Now you have him getting healthy, and you have another potentially free player that can enhance your offense next year. And you go back to the guy they drafted in the third round, Cordell Flott, who made a big play in a pass breakup in that game against Minnesota. He was taken in the third round. People thought the Giants DBs are issues, but they got talent on the two deep, and that's about the patience. That's about the coaching. That's about the scouting department and their plan of development. Remember, one of my favorite running backs, actually my number one running back last year in the draft class, was Ja'Shawn Corbin. He's on the Giants roster. He's been there all throughout the camp, rookie mini camp and everything, training camp. He's been on the practice squad all season long, elevated a couple times. So this is someone that is in their development plan. So again, it's good to see the Giants understand roster building, but the fans have to also, and in some media, you don't have flashy names, but you don't care about flashy names when Isaiah Hodgins is out there making, tiptoe catches on the sideline or excellent catches in the end zone, helping out Daniel Jones in tight situations. You don't care about, flashy names if Richie James is out there balling, getting open over the middle of the field and making plays. You also got to remember you have Wan'Dale Robinson coming back next year. This is going to be a good team for a long time with Joe Shane and also Brian Daboll. So the patience and also understanding what you have on a roster. And these are just not, throwaway guys because they don't have flashy names. These are really good football players that were high-level players at their respective colleges.
Footballgameplan.com/2023 draft guide. That is how you find this man's incredible draft guide. Follow him on Twitter so you always know where he's at with CBS HQ and everything he does at FBall Game Plan. I'm at Ross Tucker NFL. Pretty sure most of you know that already. We are at Ross Tucker Pod. The keg is kicked. We're all tapped out.
Thanks for listening to the College Draft Podcast. Make sure to also subscribe to the Ross Tucker Football Podcast, Fantasy Feast, Even Money, and The Business of Sports. All available at Apple Podcasts, rosstucker.com, or wherever podcasts can be found.